You have 5 days to remove them, or I'll start fining you," the HOA president sneered, his eyes narrowing as he glanced over at the small array of solar panels on the roof. Luca's hands clenched, his breath short. "That's illegal," he snapped, trying to control the burn of anger that threatened to explode. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from the weight of this absurdity. A boardroom full of people, many of whom had never even set foot in his neighborhood before, deciding his fate? "You've had a warning," the HOA president countered, flipping through a folder, ignoring Luca's words. "The guidelines are clear. They're unsightly. They're disrupting the uniformity of the neighborhood. You signed the agreement when you moved in." Luca shot a glance at the other board members, most of them nodding in agreement, their faces smug in their newfound power. He didn't understand how they could be so blind to the bigger picture that they were fighting against a solution to one of the world's biggest problems, sustainability. He wasn't some rule breaker, he wasn't some radical, but this was absurd. "I'm not removing them," Luca said through gritted teeth. "I've done everything according to the rules. I've filed the proper permits, the city approved them. You have no right to do this." But the president didn't blink. "Your city permits are irrelevant here. You're in a private community, and we have our own rules." There was a pause. Luca knew that the words hanging in the air weren't just a challenge to him. They were a declaration of war. It wasn't the first time he'd felt the power of the system turning against him, but it was the first time it was in his own backyard. "Look, you can't be serious. If it's a matter of aesthetics, it's more than that." The HOA president cut him off. "It's about control, Luca. We make the rules here. You and your he," sneered. "Hippie solar panels don't fit with the vision we have for this community." Luca shook his head, feeling the rage rise in him, but he didn't speak. What could he say? The system was stacked against him. They saw him as a threat to their established way of life, their standard of living. They didn't care about his savings on energy costs, his fight against climate change, or his genuine need to do something better for the planet. He was just some other, a young, idealistic guy who didn't understand how the world worked. "Fine," he finally said, his voice thick with frustration. "You want to play by those rules? Fine, but I'll fight you on this. Every step of the way, I'll take you to court. I'll make sure the whole damn city knows what you're doing." The president's lips twisted into a grin. "Do whatever you want. You'll lose." Luca turned on his heel and marched out of the room, the sound of his boots echoing in the sterile hallway. He had nothing left to lose, but they were underestimating him. He'd been here before, facing down an opponent that underestimated him, and he'd come out on top before. A week later, Luca stood in front of his house, arms crossed as he watched the moving truck pull up next door. His heart sank as a wealthy couple with their 2 kids stepped out, followed by a man in a suit. They weren't just moving in. They were his replacements. The HOA was making sure they were getting rid of every challenge to their perfect little world. "Hey, Luca, you should come by for a drink once we're settled." The new neighbor waved, a bright manufactured smile plastered on his face. It was polite, but Luca could feel the underlying judgment in the air. The HOA had already sealed this neighborhood's fate, and it wasn't long before their influence would reach out and touch him too. But what they didn't know was that Luca wasn't the same man they could manipulate anymore. He spent the next few days on the phone with his lawyer, trying to figure out the best course of action. But no matter how many calls he made, no matter how many pieces of advice he received, it was all the same. The HOA's reach was vast, and their money was enough to silence anyone who got in their way. He was fighting a losing battle. He knew that. But it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his neighbors, his community, and what they were losing by following this oppressive, greedy system. It wasn't long before Luca found himself standing in front of the HOA president once more, except this time, something had changed. He had the power now. He had the upper hand, though no one knew it yet. The twist came when a call from the electric company reached him. They were offering him an astounding deal. His solar panels weren't a violation of anything. In fact, they were now an asset, thanks to a new city initiative on renewable energy credits. The HOA could fight him all they wanted, but the city had just agreed to buy his excess energy, paying him a sum far greater than the cost of the fines the HOA was threatening him with. "You thought you were winning, didn't you, Luca?" said to the HOA president, holding the official notice from the energy company. The truth is, I'm not only staying now, I'm getting paid for it. Every month, for the next 10 years. The president's face faltered, the smugness evaporating. It wasn't just about the money, it was about power. And Luca had just taken it from them. The next few weeks were tense. The HOA tried to push back, but there was nothing they could do. The city had backed him, and the contracts were already in place. Luca was being paid for his panels, for the energy he was providing to the community that had rejected him. He was still fighting, but it wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had ever been pushed out, manipulated, or told they didn't. At the end of it all, the HOA members never admitted they were wrong. They still stuck to their views of what's proper and what belongs, but Luca knew the truth. He'd fought the system and come out on top, not with force, but with intelligence and persistence. In a way, he had won more than just the battle. He had won the moral high ground, and in doing so, he had become more than just a resident in the neighborhood. He had become a force. The first check arrived a month later, neatly addressed to Luca's name, a hefty sum that made his heart race. He was standing in his kitchen when he opened it, staring at the numbers printed across the check in disbelief. The electric company had truly paid him for the very thing the HOA had tried to strip from him. He almost wanted to laugh at the irony, but there was no time for that. There were more urgent matters to handle now. The HOA's pressure wasn't over. It was only beginning. They'd resorted to smaller tactics, anonymous letters from neighbors, passive-aggressive comments when he'd run into people at the store. They were trying to wear him down, hoping he'd cave and remove the panels on his own. But Luca was no fool. They were playing a game of intimidation, one they thought they could win because they knew how to break people down. It was always the same: isolate, manipulate, create a feeling of shame. But that wasn't going to work on him, not anymore. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. He picked it up without thinking. "Mr. Rossini, this is Alicia at SolarTech," a woman's voice greeted him warmly. "We just received your recent payment, and I wanted to confirm that the setup is working as expected." "Yeah, it's fine," Luca replied, still shaken from the check in his hand. "It's working perfectly. But I think I'm about to have more trouble with my HOA. They're not going to leave me alone." Alicia paused for a moment. "Actually, I've been meaning to call you about that. You're aware that there are incentives the city's offering, right? If you continue to produce a surplus, we can get you involved in a community program that will connect your panels to other local properties. You'll be paid more, and they won't have a leg to stand on." Luca sat up straighter. His curiosity piqued. "I didn't know that was even an option. How does it work?" "It's a system where you sell excess energy directly to the grid, but through a larger pool, local programs connected to eco-conscious projects. It's part of the mayor's push for sustainability. It's not just a payout. It's a way to make your energy generation more visible. It would make the HOA look petty in comparison if they try to come at you again." Luca ran his fingers through his hair. This could be the break he needed. The HOA had tried to bully him into submission. But now, he had a counter-strategy. To hit them where it would hurt most, it wasn't just about the panels anymore. It was about making them look foolish. It was about turning the tables completely. Asterisk, asterisk, dot, 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 asterisk. 2 days later, he found himself standing in front of the HOA board again, the same group of people who had tried to push him out, who had thought they could destroy his life with a few threats and fines. This time, however, things were different. This time, he was calm, focused, and he had leverage. "I've been talking to SolarTech," Luca began, his voice steady but firm, "and I've decided to take part in a city-run energy initiative. It's a program that allows me to sell the surplus energy my panels generate to local properties through an eco-community network." The board members exchanged nervous glances, sensing the shift in tone but not fully understanding the implications of his words. "You've taken it too far," the HOA president began, his voice dripping with venom. "We've told you time and again. These panels are not welcome here, and you're breaking our community guidelines. You see, that's the thing. The city is backing me now. I'm being paid to keep these panels up, and you can try to fine me, but I'll be making more from the electricity than the fines you impose. Every month, I'm going to earn money that'll be coming directly from your own community." The president's face flushed red. "You think you've won, don't you? You're still defying us. You're still making this neighborhood ugly." Luca leaned in slightly. No, I'm making it better, and you can't stop it. There was a long, tense silence. The other board members sat rigidly, unwilling to speak or even make eye contact. It was clear they were struggling to grasp the full scale of what he was saying. You're not just violating the guidelines anymore, the president spat. You're trying to destroy everything we've worked for. I'll make sure the others know about this. I'll make sure they understand that you're the reason we can't have order in our community. Luca took a deep breath. You're right. I'm the reason this place is changing. But the truth is, you're not the ones controlling it anymore. The world is changing, and your little bylaws can't stop it. The president stood, his face contorted in anger. But Luca was already walking out of the room, his chest swelling with victory. The HOA had tried to reduce him to a nuisance, to a problem to be swept under the rug. But now, he was part of the solution, and they could do nothing about it. That evening, Luca stood by the windows of his home, watching the sunset reflect off the solar panels on the roof. He could hear the distant hum of the electric grid, steady pulse of the city's heartbeat that now relied, in part, on the energy his panels provided. He had no illusions. This wasn't just about a win for him. It was about more than that. It was about challenging the power structures that had tried to diminish his impact, tried to belittle his beliefs, and tried to force him into silence. He wasn't just some homeowner. He was a symbol that stood against the system, and no matter how hard they fought, they couldn't erase him. The calls started a week after the HOA meeting. The first one was from the local news station. Hi, Mr. Rossini. We've heard about your situation with the HOA and the solar panels. The reporter on the other end said, his tone polite, but unmistakably curious. We're working on a segment about community solar initiatives, and we'd love to feature your story. How about a quick interview? Luca paused, glancing over at the panels on his roof. The more people who knew what was happening here, the more pressure the HOA would face. They couldn't silence him if the story went public. Sure, I'd be happy to talk, Luca replied, his voice resolute. When do you need me tomorrow? At noon works for us. We'll send a cameraman. The following day, the crew arrived just as the sun was reaching its peak, casting a warm light on the solar panels. Luca stood in front of his house, hands folded, as the reporter set up his equipment. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling of something big about to unfold. He wasn't just a disgruntled homeowner anymore. He was becoming the face of something larger, a movement against the bureaucratic powers that sought to control him. Mr. Rossini, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with the HOA? The reporter asked, standing next to him as the cameraman adjusted his lens. Luca took a deep breath. This was his moment to lay it all out. I moved into this community because I wanted a place where I could live sustainably, a place where I could have some control over my future. But I wasn't expecting the kind of resistance I got from the HOA, Luca said, his voice even but carrying the weight of his frustrations. They've been trying to force me to remove my solar panels, claiming they violate neighborhood guidelines. Even though the city approved everything and I followed all the rules, they don't care about the environment or sustainability. They care about control. The reporter nodded, his expression sympathetic. And now you're being paid for the energy your panels produce, right? Luca's eyes sparkled with a touch of triumph. Exactly. It's a small victory, but it's one that gives me the leverage I need to show that they're on the wrong side of this, and that's what they're afraid of. The camera zoomed in on Luca's face as he finished speaking. His message was clear. This wasn't just about solar panels or an HOA conflict. It was about standing up for what was right for the future of the planet. The segment aired that evening, and within hours, his story was everywhere. The next morning, Luca woke up to a flood of notifications. His phone was buzzing non-stop with messages and comments. People were sharing his story, sending him support, calling him a hero. But among the praise, there was something else: outrage. The HOA was being torn apart online. News outlets had picked up on the segment, and suddenly, the small community board that had tried to suppress him was under a microscope. Luca walked into his kitchen, staring at the screen in disbelief. The calls weren't stopping. His story had gone viral. One of the messages stood out. It was from a local politician. Mr. Rossini, I've been following your situation. I'd like to discuss ways we can collaborate to ensure that homeowners like you aren't subjected to these kinds of outdated rules. There's a new zoning bill coming up, and it might offer some protection for your panels. Let's talk. Luca's heart raced. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. What started as a personal fight against a petty HOA had now become a platform for change. He wasn't just fighting for his own rights anymore. He was part of a larger movement, a movement that could reshape the city's approach to sustainability. But with the new attention came new enemies. The HOA, embarrassed by the public outcry, retaliated in a way Luca hadn't anticipated. Anonymous letters started showing up at his doorstep, threatening to take further legal action. His neighbors were increasingly wary of him, some even refusing to make eye contact when they saw him walking down the street. One day, Luca returned, home to find a car parked outside his house, the engine running. It was an unmarked vehicle. But there was something about the situation that made him uneasy. As he approached his front door, a man in a suit stepped out of the car and walked toward him. Mr. Rossini. The man's voice was calm, but there was an underlying edge to it. I'm Gregory Novak, legal advisor for the Homeowners Association. I need to speak with you. Luca stiffened, but didn't back away. What's this about? We've tried to handle this matter privately, Novak began, his voice measured, almost condescending. But clearly, you've taken it into the public eye. Now we have to take further action. We will be pursuing legal measures to ensure that your solar panels are removed. We don't want this to escalate, but we will do what's necessary. Luca's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what this was: intimidation. They thought they could scare him into backing down, but now he wasn't just a single homeowner. He had a growing coalition behind him, and they were all watching. I'm not going anywhere, Luca said firmly, taking a step forward, and neither are my panels. The legal advisor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say another word. He simply turned and walked back to his car. Later that evening, Luca found himself sitting in front of his laptop, staring at the countless messages of support that had piled up since the news segment aired. The next step was clear. There was talk of introducing new policies that would protect homeowners like him from the overreach of neighborhood associations. But it wouldn't be enough to rely on the system alone. He needed to keep the pressure on. There was a meeting, scheduled for next week. The HOA had no idea what was coming for them. Luca had become the face of the fight, not just against an oppressive HOA, but against a system that had been built to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. And he wasn't going to stop. Not now, not ever. The next HOA meeting was set for the following Wednesday. Luca didn't wait for an invitation. This time, he was going in prepared. He had been consulting with a lawyer from the city's renewable energy initiative, and they had a strategy. The days of feeling alone in this fight were long gone. His story had sparked something larger than a neighborhood dispute. It had ignited a movement. That Wednesday, Luca walked into the HOA office with a stack of documents under his arm, documents that would change everything. His lawyer had helped him secure a meeting with the mayor's office and a representative from the city's zoning committee. They had shown him the emerging legal landscape regarding renewable energy and how neighborhood restrictions like those imposed by the HOA were being scrutinized more closely than ever before. When he stepped into the HOA boardroom, he could feel the eyes on him. The same faces that had sneered at him, dismissed him as a nuisance, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Luca didn't waste time. I'm not here to ask for your approval, he began, his voice steady, not giving them an inch. I'm here to tell you that the fight is over. You can continue your petty battles, but I've got the law on my side now. The president of the HOA opened his mouth to speak, but Luca cut him off. You know what this is about, Luca said, holding up a packet of documents. The city council is looking into amending neighborhood zoning laws to protect homeowners who want to install renewable energy systems. I've got a direct line to the mayor's office. The legal teams are on my side. You've made a mistake in trying to bully me into removing my panels, and now the city is backing me. He could see the color drain from the HOA president's face. Luca didn't care about the rest of the board members at that moment. The real power was in the city's backing, and he could feel the board members realizing it. Let's get one thing clear, Luca continued. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you that the rules are changing, and you're going to be on the wrong side of history. You want to continue fining me? Fine. I'm happy to pay your fines with the money I'm getting from the energy I'm selling. And when the zoning laws pass, your attempt to block me is going to backfire in ways you can't imagine. The board members exchanged quick, nervous glances. It was evident that none of them had expected this kind of response. The president, trying to hold on to whatever control he had left, stood up, shaking his head. "You can't just threaten us with legal action. This is about our community, our standards." Luca leaned in slightly, his eyes cold. "It's about control. You think you can tell me what I can or can't do on my own property, but that's no longer your decision. You're not the ones who decide what's right or wrong anymore. The people are, and the people are tired of being controlled by outdated policies that stifle innovation and progress." The president opened his mouth, but no words came out. Luca could see that his fight had shifted the power dynamic. The board wasn't looking at him like a rebel anymore. They were looking at him like a threat. Before they could respond, Luca stood, straightened his jacket, and took one final look at the board members. "I'll be here next month with even more support. You can either work with me, or you can continue down this losing path. But make no mistake, you won't stop. Me, you won't stop what's coming." The next few days felt like a whirlwind. The public support for Luca's fight had grown even larger. Thanks to the ongoing media coverage and the rising pressure from environmental groups, the momentum was undeniable now. A petition had circulated online, gathering thousands of signatures from people across the city who were frustrated by restrictive HOA regulations and wanted to see a change. There was talk of a community-wide movement to challenge outdated local laws that limited sustainability efforts. At the same time, Luca kept receiving messages from people who were facing similar challenges. He wasn't the only one in a fight against bureaucratic power. In some ways, he had become a symbol, a beacon of resistance against a system that was more interested in maintaining control than in protecting its people or the planet. But the HOA hadn't given up. The anonymous letters kept coming. Now, they were threatening more drastic measures, including the potential of legal action for disrupting the neighborhood's harmony. The tension was palpable. It felt like everything was teetering on the edge of something big. Yet Luca wasn't worried. He wasn't backing down. He was ready for the fight that was about to come. But this time, it wasn't just his fight. He had allies now, people who had been waiting for someone to take a stand. People who were tired of the same old narrative of power and control. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for a community, for a future. Days before the next meeting, Luca received another call, this time from a local news outlet, one that had been following the story since the viral segment. They had some new information. The city council had quietly introduced a bill that would make it illegal for private communities, like the one governed by the HOA, to impose such restrictions on renewable energy sources. The bill had a real chance of passing. And with that, the HOA's long-standing power to control residents' energy choices would be challenged on a legal level. "Mr. Rossini, we think this bill might just be the key to bringing the fight to an end," the reporter said. "Would you be willing to come down and speak at the city council meeting tomorrow morning?" Luca felt a sense of determination settle in his chest. This was it, the final piece, the moment he'd been waiting for. The next day, Luca stood before the city council, a mix of nerves and excitement running through him. His heart was pounding, but he didn't feel afraid. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today," Luca began, his voice firm, clear. "I'm here because of a fight that's become bigger than just me. This isn't just about solar panels or HOA bylaws. This is about fairness. This is about protecting the rights of homeowners who want to invest in sustainable practices and not be punished for doing so." He could feel the eyes of the council members on him, some nodding, others watching with skepticism, but it didn't matter. He was going to say everything he needed to say. "I ask that you pass this bill," Luca continued, "and make sure no one else is subjected to the same restrictions I've faced. We need a city that fosters innovation, that supports progress, not one that holds its residents back with outdated policies." The room fell silent for a moment. The weight of his words hung in the air. And for the first time, Luca felt like he wasn't just a lone man fighting against a system. He was part of something that could actually change the future. The days following, Luca's speech to the city council were a blur of activity. The bill he had spoken about was gaining traction quickly. News outlets reported on it, and social media buzzed with conversations about the changes it could bring. The HOA's influence was crumbling under the pressure, and Luca's victory, if it happened, would be a symbolic turning point. But the tension wasn't over. The HOA didn't surrender easily. Luca's phone rang constantly with messages, emails, and calls from residents in similar communities who had heard about his fight and were looking for guidance. The city was buzzing with an energy he had never expected, a feeling of possibility, but also the unmistakable fear of change. And the HOA, they were already making their next move. It was 3 days before the city council's final vote. Luca had been preparing himself for the worst, but when the HOA president called, he was still caught off guard. Mr. Rossini, the president's voice, came through the phone, clipped and cold. "I think we should settle this matter before it escalates. Any further, you've made your point, and we can discuss a compromise." Luca narrowed his eyes, feeling a surge of suspicion. "A compromise," he echoed. "What kind of compromise are we talking about?" There was a pause. "Perhaps you remove the panels, and we'll waive any further fines. Asterisk, asterisk. You can still keep your green energy setup, just not in this neighborhood." Luca's pulse quickened. He could hear the desperation behind the offer. The president knew the fight was over, but he was too proud to admit it publicly. Luca took a breath, then decided to push. "No," he said firmly, "I'm not backing down. The city is backing me, and you know it. You've already lost." The president's voice softened, but the underlying frustration was evident. "You think this is over? But we're not going to just roll over. We can still make things difficult for you. You can't win this fight forever, Mr. Rossini." Luca stood still in his kitchen, feeling the weight of the words. But now he had no fear. He'd already won. "I've already won," he replied, his voice calm but resolute. "And if you want to make it harder for me, go ahead. It only makes me stronger." The line went silent before the president hung up. But Luca wasn't done. The next day, Luca took a walk around his neighborhood. He had done it 100 times before, but today it felt different. It was as though the walls around him had started to crumble. Everywhere he looked, he saw signs of change. The support was everywhere. People who had once hesitated to speak out about the HOA's unfair policies were now rallying behind him. The tide was turning, and the HOA was no longer the indomitable force they once believed themselves to be. He stopped in front of his house and looked up at the solar panels, the sunlight glinting off them like a promise. In a way, they had become a symbol of his fight, his refusal to be silenced. They represented something bigger than just energy production. They were a reminder that standing up for what was right wasn't easy, but it was necessary. A few neighbors waved at him as they passed by, offering nods of encouragement. They didn't speak directly to him about the HOA, but there was an unspoken understanding now. They were all waiting for the city council's vote, for the moment when everything would finally change. That night, Luca sat at his desk, going over his notes for the upcoming meeting. The council was set to vote the next day, and he knew that the outcome would shape not only his future, but also the future of everyone who had been affected by restrictive HOA rules. The tension was palpable, and Luca couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The following morning, the city council gathered for the vote. Luca stood at the back of the room, watching the proceedings unfold. He had a seat reserved in the front row, but he wanted to wait for the moment when his presence would truly be felt. He knew that the other supporters of the bill were there, too, standing silently, ready to make their voices heard. The council members debated the bill with varying levels of enthusiasm. Some were passionate about the need to protect homeowners' rights to install renewable energy systems, while others were still hesitant, afraid of upsetting the balance in their neighborhoods. When it came time for the final vote, the room fell. Silent. Luca's heart raced as the council members filed their votes, one by one. He could hear the quiet murmurs in the room, the whispered words of support and doubt. Then the mayor stood, announcing the results. "The vote is unanimous," she said, her voice clear and strong. "The bill passes." Luca's heart soared. He didn't know if it was the weight of the victory or the sheer relief that washed over him. But in that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. The system that had tried to crush him had finally been forced to bend, and the world around him had just shifted. The mayor turned to Luca, her expression one of acknowledgement. "Mr. Rossini, your persistence has made a difference today. The city thanks you for standing up for what's right." Luca nodded, unable to hide his smile. He had done it. The fight was over. The HOA had been outmaneuvered, and the change he had been fighting for was finally here. It was a victory, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. When Luca returned home later that evening, he stood in front of his house again, staring up at the solar panels. For a moment, it felt as though the weight of the world had lifted off his shoulders. He had been pushed to his limits, had faced threats, had felt isolated. But now, he stood taller than ever before, knowing that his fight had made a difference. The world had changed that day, and so had he. The HOA had lost, and Luca had won, not just for himself, but for every person who would come after him, who would no longer have to fight the same battle. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning.